and welcome. Today I want to continue my exploration of UnrealEngine 5.4, including upgrades to the Movie Render Queue, MetaHumans 3.0, and for some reason I need to update all my MetaHumans again. This is not a tutorial. I've gone through the laborious task of compiling UnrealEngine every day for the past month, so you don't have to, in order to find new features that I could share with the community. Let's first tackle the changes made to the Movie Render Queue, as in my opinion they're the most important. I have this scene with a rabbit. I know, it's not brilliant. Now, to render this out, obviously, I'd open up the Movie Render Queue. Then, from here, I would open up the settings, and I would create all the settings I needed by adding these various modules: anti-aliasing, EXR sequence, path tracing, etc. And then I would come to the output and set everything up. I like node-based approaches. All this confuses me sometimes when I'm having to go through endless menus. What they've done at Epic is address this, and now we have a node-based approach. Let me show you this. I'm going to come to my project folder, and I'm going to come to Cinematics and choose Movie Render Graph Config. Yep, I know, it's a very long name. And I'm going to call this asset Demo. If I open up this asset, we are presented with this node graph. We have inputs, outputs, globals, and various rendering settings between input and output. If we take a close look here, this is global game overrides. Now, if you are familiar with Movie Render Queue, then this will be familiar to you. We have game mode override, scalability. We can disable texture streaming, LODs, disable HLODs, flush, virtual texture feedback factor. If we move on to global output settings, this will be familiar too. We can choose an output directory, an output resolution. If you want a custom resolution, you can just simply expand and change the X and the Y. We can change the frame rate, overwrite existing output, zero pad frame numbers, frame number offset, and handle the frame count and versioning. Down here, we have a deferred renderer, which is now a single node. And here we can do our spatial sample count, anti-aliasing method. We can disable the tone curve here, which used to be in the color module. And then we can do view mode index, which we can choose all of these here, which maybe we just want to render out in wireframe. You can do that from here. And here's the list. I'll just let you have a look. There we go. So let's set this back to lit. And then we have post-processed materials, and we can add additional post-processed materials and then flags. Here we have a JPEG sequence. I wouldn't personally use JPEG, but you may have a reason for that. And then render layer. I will talk a little bit more about rendering layers later. And that's it. If we right click, we have all these various nodes now. Here. I will go over those in a moment. And over here we have variables. So we have some global variables: camera name, frame number, sequence name, and shot name. And we can drag these in if we like, and then use them with any other node. Or we can create a zone variable. So I will create a variable and call this use 4K. Oops, 4K, and set this to a Boolean. And now we can use this variable outside of this graph, which I will get to. and save, and click here to evaluate the graph when you make changes. Save, and that's it. Let me show you an example that I created earlier. Right, so let me open up my 4K example. And before we go to the example itself, let's look at the nodes that are available. So I've organized them for you into conditionals, branch, which obviously, if you know what a branch is, you will have a condition here. If it's true or false, it will either choose true or false and then output that. Select. Select is going to be a very interesting one because we can set the data type here, like we can in Blueprints, to all of these. And I haven't had time to play around with this yet, but I am really interested in this one. Okay, and then if we move on to global variables, these are what I've already discussed: camera name, frame number, sequence name, and shot name. If we move on to globals, we have camera settings, which has shutter timing, overscan percentage, debug settings with capture frames render. Well, let me have a look. Oh, render doc, capture Unreal Insights trace, and then Unreal Engine, Unreal Insights trace file name. Wow, that's long. And then we have execute script. So you can select a script from here. Global game overrides, which again, if you're familiar with Movie Render Queue, you've seen this before, where we can set, you know, game mode overrides, etc. Output type, which can be a bitmap, EXR multi-layer, a JPEG sequence, PNG, or a .wav output for audio. If we come over to rendering, we have our burn-in, and we can choose a burn-in class and composite onto final image. We have deferred renderer, which I've already gone through, but it's exactly as it was before up here. So we could set the spatial sample count, anti-aliasing method. We can go to advanced, and we can use a debug feature, disable the tone curve, allow OC input output, view mode index, which I said you can go through, and then our additional post-process materials and flags. We can have path tracer, which is self-explanatory. We would set the samples here. We could set up the denoiser, disable tone curve for linear output, allow OC input output, our post-processing materials, and then obviously that gives us our path traced rendering output. Layers. Now, what I will tell you with layers is, obviously, normally we do that, for example, with stencil layers. So we would only render out the objects or actors or parts of the scene that we want to. For example, if we didn't want to render out the background and just a character, it would just render out the character, etc. This I cannot get to work. I've tried everything so far. I'm either doing something wrong or the functionality is not quite there yet. Hopefully, if it is not my fault, that will be resolved before release. This is experimental though, so bear that in mind. Next is sampling method, which is our temporal sample count. And we could use that with path tracing maybe. UI renderer, which is the widget settings are composite onto final image, so we can composite our UI or widgets onto the final image. If we come down to settings, we have our global output settings, obviously, where we choose our output directory, resolution, output frame rate, frames, etc. Warm-up settings to warm up the engine. Say maybe you're rendering Niagara particles. You want those to be emitting before you render. You would do that here. For utilities, I haven't had much time to go into utilities, but I think this is where the power of this new config is going to come in. We can apply a console variable preset. So here we could choose a console variable preset to use with our renderer, which is really useful. Here we can have a collection. We can create groups, if you look, and we can choose a collection of, say, actors, actor tag name, actor names, component tag names, editor folder, sub-level, etc., which would be really useful. I'm going to play with that some more and see what I can bring you. Command line encoder. Now, I assume with this, it's so we can, for example, we could choose video codec, audio codec, and use a command line encoder to output MP4, for example. I probably wouldn't do this, but I could see why somebody would. Here we have a modifier where you can give it a name and then create collections. I have no idea what this modifier does. I'm waiting for the documentation. I cannot find anything. Remove render setting. So here we could choose the node type of the render setting. So we could choose burn-in, for example, and it would remove burn-in settings from our render settings. Set console variable. And so we would choose our console variable here, and then the value like we could in the old movie render queue. Here it says invalid subgraph, but this is the subgraph node here. And what you can do with this is import another one of these graphs. So this is the 4K one, so we could import our demo graph, for example. But if you had a 720p or 1080p, or, you know, just some sort of different graph, you could import that here and build up your graph using those subgraphs. And then finally is our variable that we created. Brilliant. So as you can imagine, we can build bespoke rendering configurations. There are a multitude of ways you could use this. Let me give you a basic example. So this is really basic. What I have done is created this 4K switcher. So with the switch of our use 4K variable, it will either output 4K path tracing or 1080p a single frame. So I can test the render before I render out to path tracing. So how this is set up is we have an input, and that goes to global game overrides, where we set up our game overrides. So, you know, we're set up to the movie pipeline, cinematic, and disabling all the texture streaming and everything. And then I have these nodes set up here, use 4K output. So I have different global output settings depending on 4K and 1080p. So for the 4K, I have a different project, different output directory and an output resolution. So it's set to 4K, as you can see, and an output to a directory called 4K. Then this one is a 1080p. It goes to a different output directory, set to 1080p, and I'm only outputting one frame, just to test my render. And then this goes into a branch, which again is controlled by our use 4K variable. And depending on whether this is set to true or false, it will output to our globals. Then down here is my rendering section. So it's enable path tracing. So basically, if our variable is set to 4K, I have a path rendering node set up, and then an EXR sequence, a render layer, which obviously is not working at the moment. And then that goes into a branch and out to our output. If 4K is not selected, it uses a deferred renderer. I probably should put a spatial sample count there. We'll do 16. Anti-aliasing method, we'll leave it. We'll set that to none. And then we can disable the tone curve, etc. I won't do that for this. And then that's it. And then that goes into a PNG because I just want an image that I can look at to make sure the lighting and everything's okay. Then into our branch, like so. That's amazing. So you've got this config and we hit evaluate graph every time to make sure it works. Hit save. And now we're ready to use this in the Movie Render Queue. But how do we do that? Well, let me show you. If we open up our Movie Render Queue, like so, we're currently set to preset. And if we were to select this, there seems to be no way to change it. But all you have to do is click on this arrow here and click replace with graph experimental, because this is experimental. And then it creates a default graph for us. But obviously we've already got a graph we want to use. So if I click this arrow again, now our movie render graph configs are in the list. So I click my 4K. And as you can see over here, it's now exposed my use 4K variable. So if I select this and then I tick here, now it will output 4K path traced, just as I set up. If I uncheck it, it will render out a single frame. Maybe let's just do one test. There we go. So it's rendering out my 1080p frame. Overall, I like this new setup. Obviously, things will change because this is experimental. I need to figure out why the layers don't work. If it is something that I'm doing, I would like to know. And yeah, so as I said, you can now create bespoke configurations. Next, we have MetaHumans version 3. Now, obviously, there's not much documentation on what is new in MetaHumans version 3, but if we come up here to Bridge, and let's open up Bridge. If we go to MetaHumans, and we click on a MetaHuman preset, we now have a MetaHuman preset 3. And if we come over to My MetaHumans, where My MetaHumans are, they are all grayed out. So if we, for example, take Natalie Old here, this is the current MetaHuman Animator 2.0.3, and this is now incompatible. At least at this time, I cannot download, I cannot add to the engine. So MetaHumans have been updated. Now, the closest I've got to an answer was from a user on Twitter who said that MetaHumans now come with earbones. So let's try that, shall we? So here's our MetaHuman and we have our face. Let's go into animation mode. And let's add the control rig. So control rig assets, and simple face rig. Let's do that. And see if there's anything in the simple rig for ears. Oh, yeah. There we go. So even in the simple rig, there is something, if we take a look down here, ear up. So let's try that. Oh yeah, we can now zoom in a minute and we adjust our ear. It's now moving up and down with the simple control rig. Maybe we will try with the other control rig. Let's try with an FK control rig. And we type ears. So there's nothing there. And so that seems to be all they've added for now until there's some sort of documentation somewhere. I can't go any further with that. And so now we have the ability to move our MetaHumans' ears. So the past few weeks have been quite intensive for me, and I'm trying to work towards this, which is a MetaHuman crane, and I want to put this into a tutorial form. So I think the best way to approach this is to move into a Niagara regional-based particle system, and then I will move on to some other aspects of using Niagara. I don't want to give too much away with that, but this, I will try and distill this over the next week and try and get a tutorial out next week, but I am not promising because it is very complicated, and trying to distill it into something simple and teachable is proving very, very, very challenging. I am very interested in moving into Niagara systems and making content on that, just recording myself doing that. And I've been doing various experiments, and hopefully I can bring you some of that. Also, I have been doing a little bit of work in Houdini. I'm now learning Houdini, and I want to do some Houdini to UnrealEngine stuff, and that will involve MetaHumans as well. So hopefully I can bring you that soon. More tutorials are on the way, but for now, could you please hit like and subscribe? I will see you in the next one.